Again, marketing is hard. And I know this because after 21 years of constantly doing the grind, of putting in the hard work and the pain to develop blogs, to do SEO, to do social media, and to do all the things possible that you can think of to try to move the needle for your business, and it simply just doesn't work. Or it doesn't work nearly as effective as you would hope, or in comparison to how much you've invested to try to change the game for your business. The reason why companies often fail, and the number one reason why they fail to meet their objectives, usually comes down to the fact that they are essentially just too broad with their marketing. And more importantly, they're developing content about, what you're finding is you're developing content about yourself and not about the buyer. Even though in your head you know better, you look back at your marketing materials and you know what, you're like, oh my gosh, I just got it just way, way, way wrong. And so I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times, to know your buyer, but if you look at the number of companies who actually put the time and energy into writing it down and putting it into a formal process, those companies are very, very, very small. The percentages of companies that get it right, usually very small. So that's what I want to dive into today. So if you're new to the podcast, my name is Chris Carr, and this is Digital Marketing Masterclass. This is a podcast dedicated to companies and CMOs who want to try to figure out how to develop a systematic approach to generate leads, nurture leads into clients, and then convert those clients into brand ambassadors. Before I go any farther, please subscribe, click on the notification bell. We want to bring as much value as possible and bring it to you as often as possible. Okay, so let's dive in. All right, when we're talking about buyer personas, the things that I want to talk about, really talk about how do you strategically develop marketing materials that get the right message to the right client at the right time. All right, so you have to have a strategy to reach them and to know who they are. So let's sort of walk through what we believe an ideal buyer persona looks like. What we strive to do with our clients and even with our own marketing is to try to figure out, hey, what is the exact buyer? What do they look like? How do I get it down on paper? I want to look at their background. I want to look at their demographics. I want to look at their identifiers. I want to use really good benchmarking software to understand who that target buyer is. I'm going to look at everything from behavioral to what they read, to the blogs that they look at, and I want to really try to get all of that down on paper. One of the things that we also do, which is very unique for most marketing businesses, is that we develop a gap assessment, which is a 10-week deep dive into your company's marketing approach. And in that approach, we take a really, really fine look at who your potential buyers are in each vertical. I need to know, what are their titles? What is the variation of their titles? What do they do on a daily basis? What are their pain points? Who are the stakeholders they report to? What are the goals that they need to have, both financially, manpower, product, services? I need to know all of that stuff, and I need to have it written down. But other things that we do is we use AI technology, and in the AI technology, essentially what we do is we do a form of paid advertising, and the paid advertising creates thousands and thousands of variables of our argument. And what happens here is that we measure how does each buyer persona sort of gravitate to that message, so that later on, when I want to have my complete buyer persona, I know who they are, but also what kind of messaging do they gravitate towards. And so that is one of those unique approaches that if you have the ability to use AI software to understand who your buyers are, I highly recommend that you look into that. Other things that we want to do is in the beginning, we want to develop a wide net approach. So this is one of our clients that we did the digital strategy for nearly a decade. It's called Rothman Orthopedics. They're based out of Philadelphia. Incredibly, incredibly smart company. They're probably, I would consider them world-class in the field of orthopedics. And they had a campaign that was called Rothman First, which basically means that, if anybody had any pain in their knees, their hips, their spine, or anything like that, they would think, hey, you know what? We need to create our marketing materials that everyone who has pain in those regions will obviously think of Rothman first. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to not just attract one patient at a time. What I wanted to do is I wanted to develop marketing campaigns to go after one community at a time. all right? Not one patient at a time, one community at a time. And so in the Philadelphia area, cycling is a really, really big thing. In fact, about 100 yards from where I'm sitting right now is a bike trail that goes from the city of Philadelphia all the way practically to the middle of the state. It's one of the best bike trails in the United States. And the cycling community in Philadelphia is just incredible. And so what we strove to do is, after we developed the wide net approach for Rothman, then we started to go after the buyer persona specific approach. And so what we did is we had to figure out how do we find these communities and who would be the ideal community to go after. Now let's pretend I'm Bob Smith. All right? You're not going to be able to look at my social media profile and I'm saying I'm Bob Smith and I am a manager at ABC company and I have back pain or I have knee pain. All right? You might be able to get some of the details about who I am, my family pictures and stuff like that, but you're never going to really get down to the fact that, hey, you know what? I have back pain or hip pain or knee pain. So what we did was we started to say, hey, what are the sports that have chronic pain? And then how do we start to target those groups, those communities, so that when I get into a couple, key stakeholders in those communities, they're going to become my brand ambassadors. They're going to become my advocates, the raving fans, of Rothman. And so when I start to treat one or two people in the community, other people that have that kind of pain, they're going to talk to each other. And it's how the word of mouth marketing essentially spreads. All right. And so we were intentional about the community. So the reason why we picked cyclists, obviously, is they have chronic pain over time. And they also hurt themselves quite a bit. And because they hurt themselves quite a bit, they're privy to shoulder pain, hip pain, knee pain, et cetera, et cetera. So other things that we did is we also created marketing materials for influencers in their life, all right? And so, the joke is that for every cyclist with a bad back, there's a wife who's tired of hearing about it. So that is the approach that we did. Not only go after cyclists, but also go after, their spouses as well. All right. This plan also works for B2B. So I don't want you to think that this is just a B2C plan. This absolutely works. You can reach out and try to understand the buyer personas for CEOs, but then also maybe for an office manager or people that they're delegating work to. Okay, so let's go back to the cycling story. In the cycling story, once I know who the buyer persona is, I take the time to develop buyer persona specific marketing materials. So this is a cyclist guide to managing back pain. And these are articles, written on their blog about cycling and back pain. All right. And so what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to hyper target, our messaging to these specific groups. But what I develop here is that you might be thinking, well, that's a lot of work. I got to not only develop, the education materials, then I got to make one for cycling and one for golfers and one for whatever the next communities are. Well, this is what we call 80-20 offers. And what I mean by 80-20 offers essentially is that 80% of that content is probably going to be the same for every single community. But what I want to be able to do is I want to marry that content with hyper-personalized content for the other 20%. And so the variable from one offer to the next offer to the next offer is I'm changing out the cyclists, and I'm only changing 20% for golfers. I'm only changing 20% for contractors, et cetera, all right? And so what you're doing is you're creating one really good piece, and then you're changing the shell and the messaging that hyper-personalized for each one of these, other offers. Okay, so once I've done that, I want to try to understand, I want to make sure that the messaging that I do for, a high school student athlete, that's going to be very different messaging than I would do maybe for an active 40-year-old male, and it would be very different marketing or messaging that I would do for a senior citizen. So what I don't want to do, and this is why I believe that most companies fail, is that I could have a torn ACL and get marketing messaging about your spine center. If I have a torn ACL, I don't care about your spine center. All right? That's what we call unsegmented marketing, and that is what doesn't work. And 9 times out of 10, We have limited marketing resources, and so what we do is we take all of our energy, we put it into one push, and we just vomit it on our entire list. Instead of segmenting, hyper-personalizing, and getting the right message to the right client at the right time. Okay? So I'll say it again. Now if I have the same torn ACL and I'm getting messaging about maybe the 5 things to understand when you are considering knee surgery, that is what I'm talking about. That is getting the right message to the right client at the right time. Okay? None of this should feel like rocket science. But like I said in the intro, very few companies are doing this. And I know what it's like to develop really strong messaging and think, hey, I'm going to develop all of this time and energy. Why would I only give it to a small part of my database? Well, what I'm telling you is that the 10 times the amount of work that you do up front can sometimes yield 100-fold when you segment. You know, I have a good friend that says the riches are in the niches. And I want you to really try to focus on that. Rather than trying to figure out how to get a broad message and trying to be all things to all people, let's try to take it down and get it as narrow as possible with hyper-specific messaging, to be as empathetical as possible, to know their pain points, to know the promise that you can fulfill for them, some proof that maybe this isn't your first rodeo and that you've done this a number of different times, and the opportunity. And the opportunity is not, hey, buy now. The opportunity is, hey, if you're looking to take the first step, how can I guide you through that process? Okay? Now I want to talk to you about the king. Who's the king? Well, the king is Jack Canfield. So I don't know whether these books are as popular if you're in your 20s as they were when I was in my 20s, but this book was wildly successful. The first book came out, it was called The Chicken Soup for the Soul, and essentially what it is a book about a collection of short stories. Now, my hunch is that he could have had a best-selling book with that, and they may have been able to get 1 or 2 more before this concept sort of faded into the ether and people just forgot about it. But where Jack Canfield was really, really smart is that he decided to make short stories that were hyper-personalized for each what I call buyer persona, or each target audience, or in this case, each reader. And so ask yourself, would you read the Chicken Soup for the Fireman's Soul? Well, maybe if you're a fireman. I know that my mom gave me Chicken Soup for the Soccer Player's Soul, and I read that because, you know what? I played soccer, and that was what I gravitated towards, and it's what I loved. I felt like the book was written specifically for me. And so he took this idea and he broke it down into each of the buyer personas, and that is why his book series sold over 250 titles that sold over 110 million copies in the United States and Canada, and it's in 43 different languages in over 100 countries, and has sold over 500 million copies worldwide. That's what the king looks like, and you should think, you know what? That's the type of approach that I should do in my marketing. Create a really strong message. That's the wide net. Then hyper-personalize for each of my target personas. Create very specific marketing on my website, on my offers, maybe sometimes on my marketing utilities. All of this stuff matters. But if you keep it broad, you will fail. Okay? So let's look at, in summary, what did we cover here? All right? Today we looked at the importance of taking the time to know your buyer personas. We also talked about how to start with a wide net approach and strategically become narrow on purpose. And we also talked about the art and science of getting the right message to the right client at the right time. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this message. Please feel free to rewatch it and try to focus on some of the areas. I do know that if you take this approach and apply it to your marketing, I don't think it'll work. I know it will work. So I hope that you found this valuable. It is our goal to bring as much value as possible. We try to go live every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Usually we try to get it live around 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So please subscribe, click on the notification. We want to try to bring this value to you as much as possible. Other things that we want to encourage you to do is to join our CMO Marketing Roundtable. It's brand new. What I want to be able to do is try to get CMOs in here, and this is a place where they can exchange podcast requests, that they can look at A/B testing, that they can talk about marketing ideas, that they can do all of the sort of the things that, that they're sort of afraid to ask. And so when they're in a peer group of other CMOs, this is where you can kind of talk about what's working and kind of share war stories and ideas and concepts. All right? The next thing is our unique process. So this is a unique process that we've built over the last 21 years. Again, this is how we help companies develop systems to generate leads, nurture leads into clients, and then convert those clients into brand ambassadors, or what I also call the raving fans of your company, your missions, and your values. Okay? So that can be found all on one page. There's videos. It's in text format. I think it's about 40,000 words. It's everything that I've basically, that I try to implement for our clients. And you can find that at faratechuniqueprocess.com, or you can also obviously find this at faratech.com. Okay? And then also, if this is your first time on your show and maybe you're watching this on YouTube or another channel, this is our podcast. It's called Digital Marketing Masterclass. You can also find it at digitalmarketingmasterclass.io. But please subscribe, please leave a review, please leave comments below, and we will see you next time. Thanks.